Oliver, can you hear us?
Yes.
Excellent. All right.
I can.
We'll just start the meeting now.
Right, okay. Welcome everybody, and I've had apologies from Councillor Bacon, Councillor Kidd and Councillor Naz so far. They're the apologies I've had. I don't have to say this now. We're going to bring up to on the agenda, Oliver, to item 4. We're going to bring after we've done the urgent announcements and and any exclusion of press and public. So, have we got any urgent items or announcements to make? None to be made. And agenda item 3: any items be considered in the absence of the press, public and press. Yeah. No. Okay. Any declarations of interest from any members present? No. Right. Okay. I thought I'd give you a brief second, and we'll swiftly move into say a warm welcome to the mayor who's down the line today, and we're just going to go into. Do you want to give any feedback on what you're up to, just for a minute or two, and then I'll ask for questions from any of the members that are here. Okay.
Thank you, and apologies not being able to be there in person. I really am sorry. Today I'm at the Barnsley Pathways to Work Commission, which is a kind of year-long process of looking at why people in Barnsley in particular are economically inactive, and that work will hopefully feed into the work that is being done by the MCA and then become a region-wide response, and we will hope to feed some of that into government as well. So that's why I can't be with you today. So apologies, and thank you for allowing me to do this in this way. In terms of what I've been up to since we last spoke, a big focus of my time has been spent working on our campaign around bus and bus funding, as well as trying to work through the challenge that looks like and what that looks like when it comes to kind of the actual transition to the new sort of funding levels and what we're going to be doing with buses and to services in October/November. I've also been out and about meeting as many people as I could, running bus campaign meetings right across South Yorkshire to talk to our communities about those challenges and what it looks like and why we're in this situation and what we're trying to do about that and what we need from government in order to be able to fix those problems with buses. So that's been a big focus. We this month have sent out 30,000 letters to members of the community right across South Yorkshire, randomly selected households, inviting them to take part in our Citizens' Assembly. 100 of those people who are demographically representative and are representative in terms of the values of South Yorkshire in relation to climate change will be selected to take part in that Citizens' Assembly, which will run over a number of weeks later this year. And will help us to understand what the communities of South Yorkshire want from the trade-offs when it comes to the transition to net zero by 2040. So I'm really excited about both of those pieces of work. They're the things that are probably at the front of my mind, Chair, so I don't want to sort of waffle on for too long. I'm happy to answer any questions on anything else that anybody would like to talk to me about.
Do I have any questions from members? Sinead, first.
Thank you. Hello, Oliver.
Hello.
I hope my invite is in the post because Hannah says she's already had one, and I'm going to be very upset if I don't.
Not everyone gets it.
It's about the bus changes. I've already written to you with concerns from members of the public in the ward I represent, Manor, and in particular the 10A bus, which has not only changed its route such that people can no longer get to the doctors, which was always a popular... Oh, Hannah's upstaging me now. It was used as a bus for people to get from Sky Edge to the doctor further down on Duke Street. Now it doesn't go to Duke Street, and not only that, it goes down Donington Road, which was a residential street, and the idea that there are now double-deckers going down it is very alarming to people. And I've also had information that there has already been an accident involving a car and the bus. So there was no consultation. I know the bus company claimed that members were told, but we weren't. And it's just something that has affected badly the lives of both those on Skye Edge and also the residents of Donington Road. I also understand that when they have remonstrated with the bus company, the response was, we pay our road tax, we can go where we want, which, as you can imagine, was pretty upsetting. So can you please take this up and sort it out so that people can get to the doctor if they can get an appointment, obviously, and also sleep well in Donington Road?
Yeah, thank you for raising that. Firstly, I wish I could give you an invitation to our Citizens Assembly, but I have no control, zero control over the 30,000 households who receive those letters, as it should be. And also, before I say anything more, I was at the Green Estate in your ward just the other day with Ros, and I just want to say how brilliant an asset that is to the whole of South Yorkshire and all the work that they're doing there. I hope you're rightly proud of that being there in the centre of Manor Castle. So yeah, it was wonderful to see that work, and I hope we can try and find a way to make that even more impactful. And on the buses, well, firstly, I was really pleased that we were able to get the 10 and 10 back. It had been a big bone of contention. There were people from right across the city who had been telling me that was a problem for them, and thanks to people like you, Sinead, other councillors who lobbied and were an amplification of the voice of our communities. We really pushed to get that back, and I was pleased we were able to do that. I think there have been some changes to that route, and we've been in back and forth, I think, with the companies about some of that, and I've heard from various people about that challenge. I'm happy to ask Tim, who's there with you today, to look again at that and see if we can get some more relief and see what we can get the companies to do to change how that works, or what that route looks like, if indeed possible. My frustration in all of this is partly that we are having to now face another series of bus cuts, but more broadly also that the system just doesn't work in terms of the level of control that we have over how buses operate in South Yorkshire. Sometimes that simply means that we can't control those private routes that are run by bus companies, and that in itself causes no end of problems. I've previously written to bus companies alongside MPs and said, we'd like just to make a small change to a commercial route, and they've utterly outright refused. And in some instances, even when we do pay for bus services, when it's a tendered service, sometimes we have to run ridiculously long or convoluted routes because we can't afford to run two routes, so we have to run one that goes in sort of slightly weird ways and mysterious ways across the region, and therefore frustrates people because it's longer and more disruptive. I'm happy to look at it. We'll do our very best. If you want to, Sean, if you do want to have a quick word with Tim, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to talk to you, but we'll have a look and see what we can do. And Tim, if you could please arrange for a letter to go back to Sean and outlining what possible looks like, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hannah?
Thanks, Tim. Hi, Oliver. I hope you're all right.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions, but I'll take my turn and just ask one for now, if that's all right. We are hearing sort of increasing rumours, if you like, about the Police and Crime Commissioner election next May being cancelled, and that being a re-election of your role, the South Yorkshire mayoral role, obviously with the PCC integrated into it. As I say, I've certainly not seen anything official. I don't know if the chair has seen anything official on that. So obviously with, all the political parties are looking at selecting their candidates for the other combined authority elections around the country. So if we could just please have a proper and official non-rumory update on that, that would be great. Thank you.
You can, absolutely, and it's an absolutely fair question. So colleagues will know that the government themselves have said that they want, where possible, where the boundaries align, to bring the PCC function into the office of the mayor. Important for me to reiterate this. I know colleagues around the table, Shannon in particular, will know this very well already, but that won't be vested in the power of the MCA. It will specifically be vested in the power of the mayor. So it is a slightly different, a different set of powers and how that operates to the ones that we're currently used to. And we said we wanted to do that in South Yorkshire, not least because Dr. Alan Billings, who I think has done a fantastic job over his time as PCC, is wanting to stand down. So it made sense to potentially align those, given that that was government policy. And I think there are some significant benefits to being able to do that. We've been in dialogue with the Home Office, and I hope we will be in a position to share relatively soon confirmation from the Home Office that that is indeed the case. So if you bear with me, Councillor, I think we will be able to sort of share some more information in the very near future, but that is absolutely the hope. And given that government have already said that that's their intention, we've said it's our intention, I would imagine that's probably not.
Is that a promise that you're going to let us know first as soon as we hear? As soon as you hear, we will be informed as members of this committee. Are you telling that that's what you'll tell us straight away? We're not going to hear it through the press or otherwise.
So I can commit to you being the first people we tell. I can't make any commitments that somebody somewhere won't tell. You know, I can't control obviously the government and what they do. So if they tell people first, I can't stop them from doing that. But you will be the first people we formally tell about that. So let me say that to you. I think that's probably as far as I can go. Realistically, so I can say that I think we are nearly there. I think in being able to announce something. So just bear with me, and we'll come back to you as soon as we possibly can. Steve will know this better than I do. I think there's probably some other bits of the process that even when we get a letter through, I think there are still things that we need to do after that letter, after we deal with that letter. So let me just try and communicate as quickly as you can what the process looks like from here. Sorry, I realise this all sounds slightly euphemistic. I don't mean it to be, but I don't want to say the wrong thing, if you see what I mean.
No, that's fine. Thanks. It feels to me, to be honest, that I can't say how this will not happen at this point. I think it's reasonable for us, obviously outside of our membership on this committee, but as political parties, to assume that election is going ahead, and I suspect that you are also preparing accordingly.
Yeah, well, like, to be perfectly honest with you, I haven't prepared anything yet. So because I've just had a million and one of the things that I've needed to do. So there's no, if it makes you feel any better, I don't have a head start, if that's the question that you're asking me. But look, I will be as upfront as I possibly can be about about all of that. So we'll all be on a level playing field, frankly. So and I agree with you. I can't see any reason why this can't happen, but I probably just need to have a bit of a conversation with the team about that letter and what happens next. So bear with me, and I'll let you know as soon as I possibly can.
Douglas?
I'll be Tim then. Thanks, Tim.
Don't say anything I wouldn't do.
No, of course not. No. Well, I will actually. So first of all, Oliver, number 10 bus. Number 10 bus. So just wanted to pass some feedback on that. It's been really well received in all the wards that it goes through, where there's a number of green councillors there, and as you know, there's quite a lot of dialogue there. I think we're okay. Yeah, thanks, Alan.
That's all right. I'll just do it for next
Try
time.
that. Cool, thank you. So yeah, that's really been, and we had some really good testimonies about just what a lifeline it is, because it's that circular bus and not going into the city centre and out again. The question was really about how you feel about the need to get more people on buses, and as well as walking and cycling, which you're quite keen on. You expressed a lot of stuff on that. How you feel about all the Sheffield councillors yesterday voting to get people back in cars by really pandering to the vocal minority of motorists who really wanted to reopen a rat run through Nether Edge. It's really disappointing to see that just when there's evidence of children finding that as a useful route to walk to several schools in the area and all the other benefits that come with it, that councillors do a reversal of a trial that's proved itself. Is this not really disappointing for you in view of what you're trying to do about getting people on buses, getting people walking, getting people cycling, and improving the living environment?
Look, I think what I'd say is, and thank you for your comments about the number 10. Genuinely I really appreciate it. I am keen, indeed enthusiastic, to see an expansive approach to active travel, walking, cycling, scooting, skating, you name it. I'm very happy to kind of lend my support to people who want to drive forward with that agenda, and we are doing in the Combined Authority as much as we possibly can do to see that people do have the opportunity to take all those sorts of different forms of travel and transport across the region, not least because clearly people can't always get a bus when they want to be able to. So it's really important to me, and that's why we're doing so much work on things like our next bid to Active Travel England. We're already starting on that piece of work. I think we'll probably have some exciting things to say about me and Ed Clancy and what we're intending to do over the next 12 months around active travel, and some of the work that is probably less easily or visibly seen, but some of the more kind of behavioural work that makes people feel more confident about using the infrastructure that we already do have. And we do have some great infrastructure, particularly focusing on things like school streets and children, and helping people to see that active travel is something for everybody. So we'll probably do a bit of work on that over the next 12 months. I'll have more to share on that in the not too distant future. In terms of the council's decision in Sheffield, look, frankly, Sheffield Council and all the other local authorities in South Yorkshire take the best decisions in the best interests of their communities, and that's how democracy works. What I would say is my understanding was that alongside the decisions on Nether Edge, there were other schemes that were put through in their entirety, and what I see from Sheffield Council actually is a very appropriate and I think quite welcome response to some of the people who've been kind of affected by that scheme, some of the people who've got different views to me, and I imagine to you, but I think that's a listening approach. And you know, I think people would have accused Sheffield Council in the not too distant past, and have indeed, and you look at things like the various different reports, etc. I think Sheffield Council has been accused of not listening. I think what you're seeing there is a more nuanced, admittedly, but I think a balanced approach to taking some of these schemes forward. You know, clearly, I am ambitious for active travel in South Yorkshire, but I recognise we can't do this to our communities. We need to do it with our communities, and that goes just as much for those people who are not big fans of active travel as it does for those people who love active travel. We have to take everybody with us on that journey. You know, I mentioned the Citizens Assembly at the beginning of this meeting. That is why I am leading and leaning so much into that Citizens Assembly, because we actually have to understand what those trade-offs look like for everybody across South Yorkshire. And the Citizens Assembly will intentionally involve people who honestly don't think that climate change is a problem, because those people have just as much of a stake in our future as anybody else. And absolutely, we need to be able to understand how to move from where we are to where we all want to get to, and indeed need to get to urgently, but take all of our communities with us. And sometimes that will mean listening and learning and doing things at a different pace in different places, because that is the most appropriate response.
Thanks for your comments, Oliver. And it is fair to say on the Sheaf Valley cycle route, that's actually a major step forward, because that's one of the first longer distance routes. So it is good to see all parties getting behind that. But yeah, on the Archer Lane, I think you can tell I'm a bit annoyed about this. It is really disappointing.
But I think you didn't consult on it in the first place, did you, Douglas?
I did, yeah. I did a lot of consultation on that, but anyway, no point getting that argument. Chair wants to go back.
I was going to say, on active travel, are you doing the body of work, or is Sheffield City Council? And if it's the mayoralty, that's the combined authority that's doing the work, are you going to make sure you share it? All the feedback that's come back from the active travel neighbourhoods. That we to make sure that other authorities can see that body of work, you know, within South Yorkshire, so that, because you say you're pushing it forward, what exactly are your plans to push it forward in terms of looking at other places, or is it going to be led from the local authorities themselves or from the mayoralty downwards?
I think it's fair to say, Chair, it's a partnership. So there are some things that we have responsibility for and do, not least kind of clearly some of those bids into Active Travel England. And one of the things that we are doing, and I'm really pleased about actually, is kind of expanding that team that works on active travel within the Combined Authority. So as well as appointing Ed Clancy as our new Active Travel Commissioner, I know we'd had Sarah, and she was brilliant. We'd had Pete, who some of you will know, Pete Zanzatera, who both left to go to Manchester. We've now recruited back into those positions. We've got a brilliant one called Nicola, who's come on board to lead some of that work, and I think we're going to move quite quickly on some of the things that we can do at the Combined Authority, not least, as I said, some of the work around behaviour change, some of the work around actually celebrating active travel in a slightly more high profile way. So that's kind of what we can do, as well as working with the authorities to get that funding into some of those schemes. But it does then have to hand over to local authority partners to actually deliver the infrastructure itself, because that's how this whole system works. So there are different bits of responsibility within the system. I know the local authority teams are increasingly working together on various different elements and aspects of transport, and I'm sure that is no less the case within active travel, although there is more we could definitely do, and I hope we will be moving in that direction, as well as actually learning from other parts of the country, not just learning from other parts of the region. So it has to be a partnership, and it has to be a partnership between all our local authority partners and us.
Thank you for that. Ken?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question about the Doncaster Sheffield airport. There were some sort of promising noises this week, and I don't know if the Mayor's got any sort of insights they might want to share with us about that. I'm not a frequent flyer, by the way. I mean, I went on a foreign holiday. It was about the first time in 9 years, but I had a torturous journey last week back from Manchester Airport with the M62 closed in 2 lanes and a spillage. And the connectivity we've got there with the 1930s road, Transpennine Express can cancel up to 25% of the services on the day. It's very difficult that we don't have a regional airport for not only for the bucket and spade trade, but also for business and international commerce, etc. So are you able to use your good officers to help get those services restored there and assist Doncaster?
Indeed, and we have been right from the outset of this whole saga, and it has been a saga caused by Peel Group. We have been working hand in glove with Doncaster Council to first try and save DSA and then try and reopen DSA. So that has been a joint partnership between us and them. It has to be said, with absolutely zero help from the government. Indeed, zero help from Conservative MPs in the region as well. So we have been doing everything we can to try and get DSA flying again. I'm not a frequent flyer either, but if you look at the satisfaction statistics from the airports across the UK, Doncaster Sheffield Airport was #1, I think, 4 years in a row, because people value that airport so highly and did such a good job. The positives are, despite the fact that clearly it is closed right now, Doncaster Council are in a negotiation with Peel about a potential lease arrangement, and that seems like those negotiations are going well. There is the fallback position of a CPO, a compulsory purchase order, should the lease agreement not take shape. And Doncaster Council are progressing with that at the same time. They've got a whole team working on that, and then through the combined authority, through our gain share arrangements, we have committed to supporting the financial monies available to Doncaster in order to be able to reopen DSA as and when any agreement is reached. So we put the money there ready to be available for Doncaster Council in order to work with a private provider and then get the airport back open and running. I've said from the beginning, the best people to run airports are the private sector. If you look at what's happened up in the northeast at Tees Valley, the mayor up there, Ben Hampton, has spent an inordinate amount of their resources, I think going on for £100 million plus on propping up that airport. It's a smaller airport than Doncaster, and yet has required a huge amount of funding. Partly, I think, because Ben is a Conservative mayor, they've maybe got access to slightly different sources of funding than we do, or maybe more funding in some ways, certainly some more support. We've had to do this in a slightly different way and had to work with Peel, who, in our case, were being utterly intractable, but we're now getting to a point where I think there is a sort of a light at the end of the tunnel, and that's all I would say it is. There's still a long way to go on that journey, but we will stand there ready to work with, support Doncaster Council, as we have right from the beginning, to try and get to that destination that we all want to get to, which is a thriving DSA in South Yorkshire.
Jeff, next.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chair. Oliver, the last item on today's agenda is looking at the tram ownership transfer. And as you know, since its inception, I've been involved with the tram from a Barnsley perspective from day one. So it's something that I hold dear to my heart. I am concerned, of course, and I raise this every time I see you, about the fact that we're talking about a South Yorkshire super tram, not a Sheffield super tram. And the sooner we get coverage throughout the 4 boroughs in South Yorkshire, including Barnsley and Donny, the better. And obviously the Mayor of West Yorkshire, Tracy Brabin, is actively pursuing linking her 5 boroughs onto their super tram network. Obviously, I think it's important that, for example, in Barnsley, we've got two direct links from Sheffield mainline station into the Dearn and into Wombwell, and we've already established a link from Sheffield mainland station into Parkgate, Rotherham. So if it can be done in Parkgate, it can be done in either Wombwell or Dearn, preferably into both. And it's just really a question of making sure that that is very much at the top of your agenda. And I'm talking about Doncaster as well, of course, here, not just Barnsley, having been an MP for Doncaster as well in the past. I want to make sure that you've got that particular issue at the top of your super tram agenda, shall we say.
And I should say thank you to you, Councillor Ennis, because you are right to keep it right at the top of your agenda and indeed the top of mine. So I appreciate you keep on pushing that, because it is really important. I think you're right. If you look at West Yorkshire, they would kill for the sort of network that we've already got, but they have got an expansive plan for their mass transit network. If you look over towards Manchester, the extent of their network compared to ours is incredibly impressive. I was talking to Andy Burnham about this actually on TFN call. When you look at the tram network, the reason that the tram network was expanded in Manchester was because they used Objective 1 funding in order to be able to fund that, because they weren't just using the Treasury Green Book to decide where they could put money, which would have said essentially you can't put it into poorer communities because the economic uplift or payback is not high enough. They were able to use Objective 1 funding, which said actually you can look at the social benefits of doing that. So it was a very different approach to funding, and one that we no longer have available to us. That said, I am still really ambitious for the tram network in South Yorkshire. I think one of the first headlines I got in the Star in Sheffield in my first week, I think, was, as Mayor was saying, plan to restore South Yorkshire's trams. And it wasn't quite a plan, but it's certainly an ambition. We're working with Sheffield and colleagues in Sheffield, not least Ben Miskell and Tom Hunt, on their vision for tram. I have an expansive vision for tram. The money is another question entirely, because it is hugely expensive, as you can imagine, to reopen railway lines, to extend tramways. But if we can find a way to do it, I am really ambitious to try and do that. And it should be a South Yorkshire network. It absolutely should spread across South Yorkshire. And that's not just because it's good for us. It's actually good for the heavy rail network as well, because the more you can take off the heavy rail network potentially onto either tramways or restored railways, the more capacity you have on the heavy rail network, which can only be good for Network Rail, for DFT, for train operating companies too. So it works for everybody. It's a good thing to do. It's another example, I think, of what true levelling up would mean: investment in the tram network from central government to that scale and that extent to allow us to do some of that work. And I'm really ambitious for it. It's got to be a part of a thriving integrated transport network in South Yorkshire.
All I'd ask is, with this, you talk about emergent plan. Have you got a timescale for when you're going to have a plan? Because one of the things, as we know from government, and my conversation I had with you when we met, is that we need to have some of these projects so that a lot of the body of work is done. So when there's bidding for and funds come available, that we can say, we're ready, we've got it. Have you got a timescale for this?
Well, I don't have a date for you, if that's what you're asking me, Chair. So we're working with partners, as I say, in local authorities, and some of that is a bit of an iterative process with government as well. So kind of understanding what the government timelines look like allows us to shape some of the work that we do. And also, clearly, there is a political element to this as well, in terms of kind of, I'm conscious there are elections next year. Clearly we've already talked about my potential kind of role in that space. We've got to think about some of that too, as well as kind of a general election and what we might get from a new and different government. So kind of there's a sort of series of things we need to think about. I will come back to you, if you don't mind, Chair, and kind of give you a bit of a better insight. We can put Tim, can I ask you that you can just note that we write from either Pat or me or Martin, and just kind of let people know what that timetable might look like and where we are in that process, please.
Yeah, it would be very good to have a timetable, because one of the things is, if you're under a bit of pressure, because otherwise this could could always be an ambition and never a plan, and that's what we need to have in South Yorkshire.
And I think it's absolutely fair comment. What I don't want to do is kind of give you a false prospectus and say that we've got a date in mind and it's X, Y, and Z, when actually I want to be able to do the work properly. I want to be able to know where government are on some of this, and actually just saying to you we have a certain date in mind that's our date, but might not be partners in local authorities, indeed might not be governments, and probably wouldn't be very helpful. So let us consider that in the round and then write to you if you don't mind, Chair.
Okay, Hannah, you've a question.
Thanks, Oliver. Yeah, just a couple of things before I come to my next question. Agree with Jeff about the tram network needing to be South Yorkshire wide. Never mind getting into Barnsley, it'd be really helpful if Stocksbridge could have a tram. It's very much in Sheffield, and it has really quite atrocious transport links. In terms of my residents in Penistone, they need a tram station in Stocksbridge more than they need one over in the Dearne or in Wombwell, despite them being within the Barnsley authority. And just in terms of airports, I think that Labour-run Manchester City Council does very, very, very well indeed out of Manchester Airport. So I think that public investment and ownership of that sort of facility is certainly something to be looked at. Question totally different from what we've been talking about. Been discussing with some colleagues about. We'd like to know more about what the combined authorities' kind of international strategy is. So we know that all the towns in the region have twinning relationships with cities overseas of varying strengths. I think it's fair to say. I myself was lucky enough to be involved on a twinning trip to Schwäbisch Gmünd last summer in Germany, which was lovely. And Jeff, I'm sure you've been as well, haven't you? The way that the town there in Schwäbisch Gmünd manages their twinning relationships is like really quite impressive. It's a full-on sort of industry for them. But I'm hearing that this is something that potentially the combined authority are looking at in terms of their international strategy and how they build links with not just Europe but further afield as well, and the sort of constituent towns within the authority. If you could give us an update on that, that would be really interesting, please.
Yeah. And first, let me just talk about Penistone, because it's a really good point. So, the Stocksbridge flyer, I think, is probably not working as any of us would like it to. I know there were some quite big commitments made by our Conservative MP, but regardless, it's not. I don't think any of us would think that that's working as well as it could. And I agree with you entirely about kind of tram link out to Stocksbridge. Look, but I also think that the what you've just done there is point to what we will come up against, and I think this is a great problem to have. Frankly, is kind of a clamour for the tram to go to different parts of our region. So it's something we have to manage, and we'll have to be led by the evidence. We'll have to be led by funding. Clearly, if I had my way, I would be able to. I would love to be able to extend the tram to both the Dearne and to Penistone and etc. and on and on and on. But anyway, look, when it comes to twinning, I think there's clearly a load of good work that goes on when it comes to twinning across South Yorkshire. I know the Schwäbisch Gmünd twinning quite well. Councillor Ennis will know. My family are involved. The Huggan Music Festival is always, I think, a highlight in my dad's country. Absolutely, I think I'm really keen to do that whenever we can, and it's substantive. I conversations use those related better part in that space. Investment linked to develop, and I think that's probably right. I think in that development, I think we've got some really good for Barack Obama, who specifically mentioned South District, and that copying our model. I am actually going to help them. There are FDI links with there. Help them open their AM, and as well as state for commerce, I believe, in the States, and talking to her about what we can do in terms of financial or economic links. So there's a bunch we can do. I think that America is an obvious place for us to go, as well as in Europe, and I'm keen to develop as close ties as we can with places like Germany, with Austria, and other European nations, because that's where our most obvious relationships are and where I think we can derive most benefit.
Thank you very much. I've got one more. I've got a question from Douglas.
Yeah, thanks. Just one more question. Oliver, was the plan for community education, because we haven't talked about sort of the wider skills and agenda and everything, but community education in particular, it's been a bit contentious, but where are we with it?
Well, in terms of the skills agenda more broadly, you'll be aware that the chambers and others have recently sort of submitted their LSIP. We have brought in some people to help us develop our skills strategy, and clearly also we've got a new portfolio cabinet model as part of the MCA governance, meaning that Steve Houghton is now the lead for skills on the MCA's cabinet. And Steve is now looking at that in partnership with our team in order to see kind of what that looks like next. If you don't mind, Councillor, I might have to come back to you at the next meeting to give you a bit more of a nuanced update, just because I'm aware that there's a load of moving parts at this moment in time in particular, and I don't want to mislead you by giving the wrong information. So if you don't mind, if we can take that as a note, and I'll come back and maybe I can give you a bit of a fuller answer about skills more broadly, actually, because I think there's a bunch going on at the moment. One of the reasons that, like I say, I'm here in Barnsley as part of the Pathways to Work Commission is actually, again, with Steve, looking at the skills agenda, what we can do through skills to help people back into the workplace, and community education and skills are part of that challenge. So let me come back to you next time, if you don't mind, and give you a bit of a fuller answer about the broader skills picture, if that's okay.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd be happy with that. I wonder if we could get a report back at the next meeting. If the committee thinks that's useful, just because it is a way of tapping into the most disadvantaged people. So yeah, thanks.
Good question. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think I've got any more questions. I'd like to thank you for your time today, even though you look like you're in a broom cupboard somewhere.
In the beautiful surroundings of Wayne.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Got no questions from members of the public being submitted, so we'll move on to minutes of the previous meeting held on the 22nd of June. Have everybody had a chance to read them? I hope. Are members content with the minutes are an accurate record of the meeting? Thank you. Right, I'll just assign those as appropriate. Right, we're going to move on to the matter arising and the review of the action log. So find that page. Okay. Right, any okay, so I could go through them just line by line, I think, just as a top headline, and then we can ask if anybody's got anything to ask about that. Right, from we've got the South Yorkshire Renewal Fund. Anybody wish to comment or anything to raise from that? Which page? We're on page 13. Bus funding update. This is still page 13.
So, Chair, sorry, just briefly, that report's now due to come in the December meeting, I believe, which is the update on the fare cap.
Thank you very much, sir. And on to page 15, we've got update on coming to be updated at.
I can provide updates.
Yeah. Okay. And then moving on, we did 15, 16. As the rise actions. On allocate. Yeah. Right there. It was quite a summary. Okay. And the Mayoral Sheffield. Okay. And the Police and Crime Committee work. Is that fraud? No, so we can come for that. Open actions. South Yorkshire Renewal Fund corporate metrics were brought to the March committee meeting. As part of the committee end of year report. Funding up that. Okay, and update on what we're going to. Yeah, okay, right. So next, review of latest forward plan of key decisions. Any questions on the forward plan? No. But, sorry.
Just a query, really. That I noticed that both Barnsley and Doncaster get a rural shared prosperity fund share out, and I just thought that Sheffield, despite being a city, has enormous rural hinterlands, so I just wondered why we weren't part of that. Is it a government formula or something?
It may be that there's already been awards. This is obviously the forward plan of decisions, but we'll get an answer to you about whether it is just Doncaster and Barnsley, or Rotherham, and why Sheffield isn't included. Can you capture that, Helen?
Because I think we need an update on that to find out why. Go on.
Okay. I wonder why you're interested. On page 28, it says infill of disused former railway tunnel under Woodburn Road, and then it also sort of says somebody to design and repair the tunnel to prolong its life. Infill sounds like you're filling it up so that it doesn't get used, and then the decision is to repair it so that it can be used. I was just a wee bit confused by that.
Do we have any information on that, or do we need to get some on the disused former railway?
I can provide a very brief update, Chair, if that's of help. So this is the currently unused and has been unused for some period of time, adjacent to the Nunnery Square Park and Depot. It's in poor state of repair. It's got a highway over the top of the tunnel, which would, if the condition of the tunnel was to deteriorate further, be subject to potentially a weight limit. We've done monitoring and assessment of the tunnel, and periodically there was a plan, or there is a plan to infill the tunnel, but there is also a parallel plan to consider whether that tunnel might be needed for restoring your railway's connectivity. So what we don't want to do is to do the full infill works until we fully explored the opportunity the tunnel might allow for use for an RIR scheme. So both of those are currently in progress, but at some point we will have to do something, either infill or make good the tunnel for passenger use. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. I hope it is kept open.
Yeah, I'm very interested to hear that, because I don't know the area, but there's been so many examples where former lines have been lost forever by infill, and I've seen that certainly in the Dearne area, where potential, that could have been a route for the tram going through. We've just lost the route because it's been infilled as a sort of short-term thing in the past. I accept what you say, Tim, that something's got to be done. It's either got to be repaired or filled in. But yeah, but certainly excellent point about potential to restore those routes that probably shouldn't be lost anyway.
Hannah?
Yeah, I agree with Ken. Also really pleased that the potential to use that tunnel for passenger use in the future is being kept open. I probably receive one email a month asking me when the Woodhead tunnels are going to be reopened for passenger use. They are not infilled, but they are very much full of electricity cables and also a little out of date. Yeah, there's a very passionate group of people still on that one. I would hate you to be subject to that kind of scrutiny.
Just going to flag up the thing about this. So we're not discussing this at the moment, it's just a future work plan thing. I would say, if there is a report coming back suggesting that it's infilled, could we have some aspect of the heritage aspect to it? Just because I know that there's a lot of people interested in the heritage of those very early railway bits around there. So it'd be useful to have that addressed.
Yeah, I'm happy if we record an action. Once a firmer decision is made, Chair, we can bring a report back to this group for consideration.
Well, one of the issues with the structure is it's in quite poor repair. The highway runs over it. Sheffield Council have had to narrow the bridge, and I think put weight restrictions on there. So there's a certain point where a decision has to be made.
It would be good for us to have sight before the decision is made, because obviously we're a forward-looking committee, so we need to make sure that we have the full input, because what we've got to do with some of these infrastructure links, as has been alluded to, is we've got to stop what we look at as managed decline and look at how we're expanding potentially the network. Any more questions on that? On the forward plan? Okay. We're moving forward to item 10 on the agenda, the committee work plan, and following the committee workshop 24th of July 23, which produced the attached draft committee work programme, i.e. the long-term agenda for 23-24. This work programme focused on the most significant upcoming change programmes at the MCA and the areas of work which are high priorities for the committee and South Yorkshire's communities. It also remains flexible enough to accommodate any urgent short-term issues that might arise during the year. Are there any questions on the work plan? Sinead first.
It's a wee bit tangential, but for the December meeting, when we have the £2 bus fare impact evaluation, we've also, the authority has also reversed the reduction in fares for younger people, and I wonder, is that being evaluated too, to see whether there are fewer young people using the buses? And part of that is also because education, or certainly tertiary education, is now being regionalised to some extent, and so travelling from Doncaster to Sheffield or vice versa, is that going to be possible? You know, you want to go to X college to do this course, but can you afford to do it? Or do you have a family who can afford to do it for you? So I just not quite sure how that fits in there, but it sort of does.
I think it definitely does. Can we have some? Is there any evaluation work going on? Do we know, Tim?
I suggest you don't ask the legal representative. No, it's quite okay. You're talking about the 18 to 21 scheme, which ends on the 1st of November. So we have done a midpoint evaluation of that scheme. We can do a further evaluation of the benefit and impact of the scheme in terms of volume of use, type of trips. I'd actually just recently commissioned some work by one of my team to look at where the major trips are to and from origin and destination of users of that scheme. Not unsurprisingly, quite a few of them were Sheffield based, so bus routes from Crooks, Walkley, Broom Hill, as you might expect, places of that nature, but there are actually also much further longer distance trips on the X1, the X10, X78, which were more of a surprise in terms of volumes, because they are clearly people travelling to education or travelling further for perhaps entry level jobs as well in terms of that age range. So clearly it is being used for a number of purposes. Happy to bring back an update to a future report. I'll need to double check in terms of timing whether we can land it for the December meeting or it comes to a subsequent meeting, but happy to take that as an action. Final point of note, even though the concessionary reimbursement that the MCA pays for this scheme is ending. We're in live discussions with bus and tram operators to see if they're prepared to make a commercial discount for holders of that pass. So there may be an opportunity, whilst they won't necessarily benefit from the full scheme as it exists now, they will still not have to pay the full adult fare. And again, we can provide an update on that in due course.
While we're talking about young people, which isn't on the paper at all, bus route to the AMRC, if you're an apprentice, how do you get there? Because we want them to get there because it's marvellous, and they can't at the moment. Is there any way we can encourage the mayor to do something about that?
I think we should do to look at it, and because I mean it's not the AMRC per se, but that is an issue of apprenticeship, because obviously we've got further on the paper about taking over the trams. Well, that's going to be within the gift of the Mayor Combined Authority, whether they grant passes on a concessionary basis, won't it? And that's something that we need to look at. Especially if we're looking at expanding the tram network, has been said, then that's potentially something we can look at of how we get people potentially to various colleges to be able to afford to be able to participate in courses that they particularly want to do. So I think it's something we need to bring forward. How would we do that in terms of our legal officers?
Well, I mean, you can add it to the work plan, or it can be part of Tim's next update to you, since transport is a key issue. I mean, just on the tram and concessionary fares, my understanding is there is no intention to remove concessionary fares when the tram comes into public control. So the same concessionary fare scheme as applies now, we apply to the tram as we do to buses. We treat tram as a bus, effectively.
Okay.
That's what happens now.
Which is fine for pensioners, but not for people who are a decent age.
Yeah.
So I'm a pensioner.
The child concession applies, for example.
First, Hannah, as I saw a hand first.
In the future utopia, where we have both the entire South Yorkshire bus network and tram network under some element of public control of the Combined Authority, could we not perhaps have a ticketing method that works across both?
Oh, wow.
Some people call it an Oyster card.
Douglas.
So I was just going to say, on the issue about the evaluation, I mean, from my point of view, I think it'd be helpful if we could have an evaluation of all the schemes that have been in the equivalent interventions, insofar as they are, because I guess that it's unrealistic to expect a full evaluation of those other schemes like the 1821, but it'd be useful to see what we know so far at the meeting in December, so we got a rounded picture of how all the interventions have compared to each other, and possibly what other interventions might have been considered.
I'm happy to take that action. It may be at different levels of detail, because
Understood.
the work we're doing to evaluate the £2 fare cap is based on extensive market research, and we may not have time to commission other work to provide an equivalent level of detail for 18 to 21 or any other concession. But notwithstanding that point, we can bring an update in terms of utilisation, customer commentary, whatever is available at the time for other schemes, then happy to do that.
Great.
I would say I'm quite happy to have an interim report that we could have on team. If it's an interim but not a full report, we can have that as part of some of our meetings that we're going to have on teams, that would then we can have some feedback and allow us to then process what questions and what direction we'd like you to push forward. So we can do that, and that could be, rather than taking up a chunk of the agenda as an interim report at a formal meeting of the Scrutiny Committee, that the members of the committee are presented with some updates on where move forward, and then so that we can then see what we can suggest as ways forward to the authority.
Just one other point in view of what the Mayor just said about the community education thing. I think it's probably going to come out with a written update, but wait and see. But would it be worth getting that on the agenda for December, just so that it can be logged there? I think it'd be useful if you can add that to the work plan in view of the conversation.
Very worthwhile. Now we move on to bus franchising, and it's going to be presented by Tim Taylor, Director of Public Transportation Operations, on behalf of Pat Beyer, Acting Executive Director of Transport. Hand it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just wait for the slides to appear on screen. Just give our colleagues a moment. Next slide, yeah. Not much to say on this particular slide. So I thought I'd start, Chair, just obviously reminding members, attendees here, in terms of some of the motivation and background as to why we have started this piece of work from a franchising assessment perspective. You'll all hopefully be very familiar that bus patronage in the region, and indeed nationally, has been on a fairly continual rate of decline for many years, and in particular in our region has seen year-on-year decline, but particularly that rapid drop-off that occurred from COVID. We're starting to see numbers recover, but they're still at much lower levels and much suppressed levels compared to when pre-COVID levels, and indeed go back a decade when we saw well over 100 million trips per year on bus. We're only going to reach around about 65 million this year in terms of our forecast, so a good 30%, 35% drop in overall demand. That's further exacerbated by some customer groups, so pre-COVID levels of demand compared to now for elderly passengers, ENCTS passengers, is even further suppressed, so we're at only around about 65% of pre-COVID demand for those particular passengers as well. Inevitably, that level of downward levels of demand has put pressure, because of the nature of the system, of the deregulated system we currently use, has put pressure on bus operators in terms of the commercial market. The commercial market will inevitably reduce its service offer, both in terms of frequency, extent, and hours of operation, to match services to passenger demand, and passenger demand that provides them and affords them a level of profit to continue operation. So the overall frequency of services has reduced, and the overall levels of mileage operated in the region has also reduced significantly during that time. And again, happy to go into a bit more detail on that if people have any questions. This unfortunately does create both a spiral of decline in terms of the suitability and attractiveness of a bus network for passengers, which then further reduces demand. All of those things in association therefore produce a level of pressure on the combined authority, previously the Transport Executive, in terms of the levels of subsidy it has to put into the system to allow the non-commercial services to be maintained, and our increasing cost base for tendered services has gone up from pre-COVID somewhere in the order of about £7 million a year to just short of £90 million this year in terms of levels of public subsidy required. So those are really very much the background and the conditions by which the case for change was seen to be necessary, and probably further exacerbated, I'd hasten to add, by probably one of the major factors that I'm sure you all hear on a very frequent basis, which is about performance of services, so buses turning up on time or indeed turning up at all. So those punctuality and reliability issues, compounded by frequency reductions, compounded by increasing costs and reduced levels of service, are all things that absolutely necessitated the need for undertaking the franchising assessment. Next slide, please. So just to give people a bit of a sense of where we're at in the process. So the combined authority, endorsed by the Transport and Environment Board as was, and as per Oliver's brief mention earlier, our governance arrangements have changed and that board has now stood down, but whilst it was in existence, the Transport and Environment Board endorsed the case for change which was presented to it last October. That initiated some pieces of work which we are now well into the meat of. That assessment process, as it's described, both complex and and time consuming, not least because of the levels of detail that the case requires you to go into, but also because it's a statutory process, so there are minimum requirements set out in legislation under the Bus Services Act which require you to follow a prescriptive process to ensure that you provide a case to allow a decision to be made. So that's the process that we're following. We're clearly trying to accelerate that as best we can and do as much of that work as quickly as we can. However, what you don't want to do is to do it too quickly and come up with a compromised output from that process. If you just jump on to the next slide. If I just briefly explain the process of what that franchising assessment requires. So you may be familiar with the 5-case model, again frequently used by DFT, and each of the cases is fairly obvious in terms of setting out the strategic environment in which a franchising decision should be taken and the benefits that might afford, the affordability in terms of the overall financial position as well, for the various options assessed, and again I'll come on to those in a moment. The economic case in terms of its value for money case overall, and the level of commercial risk associated with those options, and that's a combination of the commercial risk of operations, but also in terms of taking fair revenue risk that would be required by the combined authority should franchising take place. And then overall the management case, and again I probably wouldn't downplay the scale and the importance of the management case, because it requires a wholesale change in the way that the combined authority would operate in terms of its level of oversight, scrutiny, and day-to-day management of operations of a franchise network, but also in terms of the associated
Which way round are you doing this? Have you done the strategic case first and say this is what we want to do, and these are all the options, and then are you then looking at the other 4 pillars, or are you doing it as a...
Typically the approach is the strategic case is generally written first, and then the 4 cases beneath it are then written in parallel. But it is in its very nature an iterative process, because you'll develop within the financial and other cases implications back to case. But the strategic case generally speaks written first, because it talks about in which this may policies of the MC authorities surround climate change, for example, those involved around a decision and into financials related to
the case is going to get so that we know what you're building that base.
A work in progress, and we'll be wouldn't like to comment at shared publicity, not been briefed in this question away. A question of to share combination or indeed all of these cases to allow you to attend. Next slide, please. So again, apologies, this might be a little bit small for people to read, but I'll endeavour to explain exactly what this is trying to demonstrate. So in that 5-case model that I've just described, the business case has to appraise the benefits of franchising relative to a do-nothing option. And the do-nothing option in this is the current arrangement, which is effectively an enhanced partnership. So if you're not aware, which hopefully you all are, the combined authority since last year entered into enhanced partnership with bus operators. This is a voluntary arrangement, but again it's contained within the Bus Services Act, so there is a description and a standard by which enhanced partnerships operate. That affords us, frankly, not a huge greater powers than we currently had prior to that, and there's no obligation for operators to participate, but they do for now. But it still gives the operators the control over the vast majority of the bus network. They still control 75% of the commercial network that operates out there today. So that's your do-nothing option, and obviously the operators maintain and own the buses. They also maintain the vast majority of the depots that exist out there in South Yorkshire at this moment in time. So the franchising elements and the options relating to franchising, we have effectively 4 scenarios, 4 franchising options that are being assessed against that base case. The first scenario maintains ownership of both vehicles and depots by the operators, and in essence all the combined authority does is contract prescribe and describe the requirements of the network in its entirety across South Yorkshire. So effectively, a fully tendered network is the easiest way to think about this. The following three options are effectively variations on that theme, either with wholly owned depots and vehicles by the combined authority. So we own the depots, we own the vehicles, we lease the vehicles back to the operators, they pay to have use of those vehicles and the depots, and then they provide the drivers and the scheduling and the resource planning associated with that. And then the last two schemes are effectively a switch between either the operators owning the depots but not the vehicles, or owning the vehicles and not the depots. So all of those four options will be assessed against the base case and given relative scales of benefit and a BCR score relative to the base case of the enhanced partnership as it stands today. Could you just go back a couple of slides, please? When we did this yesterday, we probably should have changed the sequence of slides, didn't we? Now I realise. So we are in the process of finalising and finessing those cases and each of those scenarios. We are looking at the cost and plans of things like vehicle ownership and how vehicles are bought, maintained, leased and disposed of over their lifetime. Understanding the costs of owning those, the costs of borrowing in order to be able to afford to do those things, the risks associated with farebox revenue, because there's clearly an assumption that the MCA, through this process, whichever option you have, the MCA takes the farebox revenue and uses that where possible to reinvest back into the system as well. So once we have that full business case ready, ordinarily these business cases will go to the Department for Transport for appraisal. That's not the case in this instance. This will come to the combined authority, and the combined authority will take that decision, and only following that decision, assuming it is a positive decision, will you then go into those post-assessment phases that you see on screen now, which starts off with a statutory audit process, again required by legislation, followed by a public consultation, followed by a selection of the preferred option, and only then do you then go into full implementation of the network. So the plan is to conclude the assessment work later this autumn, and then we'll move into the required statutory phases thereafter.
Question for Ken?
Yeah, it might sound a bit of a mundane point, but I understand that Merseyside are a lot further down this route, if you like, than South Yorkshire. It's just really any, can you just assure us that any learning points that they've had with the different options will sort of be taken into consideration if they've, think they're much further on with this. I'm not exactly sure where they are with it, but at least there's any learning points from.
So Merseyside are not actually that much further forward than us. They've finished their assessment process. They've yet to take the decision to their combined authority for the decision, as I understand it. But so they're maybe a few months ahead of us, perhaps. We know Manchester are clearly much further ahead of us. In fact, as of this coming Sunday, they will their first franchised scheme area in Greater Manchester will come into effect. We know from the work that Greater Manchester did in the run up to their franchise, and I think probably all combined authorities are grateful for the work that Greater Manchester have done in this space, because they went through an awful lot of the pain that the rest of us would rather frankly avoid. And they faced a judicial review through that process. They've faced some challenges around their depot strategy as well. We are learning all of those things from those other areas. We've been and spent time actually in Greater Manchester in the last few months to talk to the team that are implementing their franchise scheme as we speak. So there's clearly learning to be shared between combined authority areas across the north and West Yorkshire as well, because they're in a very similar position to us in terms of timescales as well.
Yeah, I think it was particularly the reason I was around the depots, who actually ran the depots, who owned the depots, if it was part and the complications that can lead to. So I appreciate what you're saying.
That's particularly why, Councillor White, that's why we're taking the different options in the way we are, to try and separate out the benefits or otherwise of owning a depot versus not owning a depot, or owning the vehicles or not owning the vehicles as well.
Jeff, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Supplementary question to the line of question that Ken's been pursuing, Tim. You said that Manchester was the furthest down the line. are doing their franchising, it appears on a piecemeal basis for part of the area to start with and then building up to other areas. Is that something that we may actually consider when we get further down the line in terms of having different franchise models for different parts of the county?
Absolutely. So as yet fully undecided, but one of the underlying assumptions in our approach is that we would not implement franchising across the entirety of South Yorkshire in one go. And the reason why that's not a good idea is because the management and organisational capacity to do that does not exist. So we've taken the learnings from Manchester. I think they're doing theirs in 4 phases from memory. And we're looking at the number of phases that would be appropriate for South Yorkshire in terms of how you would do that, but also then options about sequencing. So Manchester have actually chosen to do Bolton and areas of the northwest of Manchester, as I understand it, first. Not necessarily because they're the most profitable parts of the system, but because it may give them the most benefit for the reasons that they've taken decisions on. So again, we'll apply that same principle and make those same kinds of decisions here in South Yorkshire should we need to.
Hannah?
Thanks, Tim. I think actually Jeff's question covered mine off, to be honest. So.
Douglas?
Right, thanks. Yeah, good question so far. I was just going to ask about the audit. When it says audit here, who does that audit and what sort of date we're looking at?
I understand it's an external audit by external auditors. Steve from Legal may have a better view on
the legislation requires you to have an independent auditor, and there's only a small number of firms who can actually undertake these, and it's some of the bigger firms.
Is it the usual big names? Like
and even some of those, I think, because it's quite niche. So the legislation requires you to have that audit, and it requires you to go to the MCA to take a decision in principle to proceed before you go into that audit. So effectively, the case would go back to the MCA. They would then decide if it's worth going into audit and the next steps.
And when are we looking at, if we were to get, so, because the process is doing the assessment, when are we looking at to get to the audit?
So we will only conclude the assessment this autumn.
Okay.
We haven't yet scheduled the decision by the MCA for that to be taken, and only when that decision, as per Steve's comments, has that decision been taken, will it then proceed to. So it'd be remiss of me to give you a date now because I wouldn't want to second guess it.
And when, so talking about the point, the strategic element of the assessment is sort of come first in draft, even though it will be tweaked by light of the other elements.
Yeah.
When could this committee see a sort of workable draft of where the strategic assessment might be?
The strategic case is part of the whole assessment.
Sorry, strategic case.
So the strategic case has to be contained as part of the 5-case model that goes as an entirety as a single, effectively, business case for the assessment decision to be taken. So the MCA will not consider the strategic case 1 month and then the management case another month by way of example. All of those things will be looked at in one go. I'll take the answer as per the earlier question about when we can provide copies and details of individual cases and indeed the whole business case to this group, and we'll come back to you on that.
So the question really for this committee is, I mean, I think we all accept that bus franchising is an incredibly important process where there's a lot of political interest as well, but if we wanted to take this forward to examine it as the work goes forward and the strategic case of the assessment is going to be the first major bit there, do we need to be pitching for that?
I think the draft, because when you've got a substantial draft strategic case, if that doesn't look like it's stacking up, then nothing else does.
I mean, the cases are, again, the legislation requires you to build all 5 cases effectively, and as Tim described, it is iterative. And those cases will come together at some point later in the autumn and when the works. I think just going back to the point, just again for committee's information, my understanding about Liverpool, and it's relevant, is that to implement franchising significantly, there's a significant number of hundreds of millions of pounds required to do it. Before you go into audit, the audit has to opine on the authority's ability to fund the affordability of the scheme. Now, I don't know precisely with Liverpool, but there was an issue around not proceeding to that next step until, so put pressure on government almost to come up with the money to fund the cost of franchising. So before you go into audit, you need to know how you're going to afford to deliver what it is you want to deliver. And this is why it's quite iterative in many ways, because there isn't an endless pot of money. So you have to come up with a scheme that meets the funding pot, or you're getting extra funding from government or wherever.
But also with that, can I just, is the vagueness of the timeline as a result of the fact if we've seen it appear to have predetermined that you're going to take them over, is that because the bus company could potentially or ask for a judicial review or
Exactly. So an authority will have to worry about predetermination. So there is no decision taken until a decision is taken to proceed. What this is about is an assessment about whether it's possible to proceed.
Okay.
And strategically, is it a good idea? Economically, is it viable? Is there a business case? And that's why obviously politically views may be expressed, but through the authority, there's no decision taken until we're not predetermined in a decision, because there's a statutory process to go through to get to that decision, and we can't prejudge that.
So I mean, just by association is that is the key distinction between scrutiny and the decision-making process. So given that we've got no decision-making function in that process, the question for us is whether we want to be looking into that at some point, fully accepting its draft, it's not binding, etc. And there might be issues about whether the papers could be made public, but the question for the committee is, how much of a say do we want to say in that process, and then how would the mechanics of that work in a way that actually fits in with the work that Tim is doing.
Okay. Thank you, Sinead. Douglas.
Oh, yeah.
Right, I was just going to ask a fairly daft laddie question around the audit, because at the moment the audit firms are having enormous problems auditing local authorities, and I'm off to audit committee after this, and I recognise that some of us 2 years behind now almost, and whether there is capacity to be doing stuff like this as well.
And I think that is becoming an issue, because there's so few firms can do this audit, and like you say, they're already significantly struggling with their statutory, the statutory local authority audits. There's not that much experience. I think Cambridgeshire are looking for an auditor at the moment. Cambridge and Peterborough are doing franchise as well. I think again they're probably slightly ahead, but not far ahead. So it is something we're aware of and we're looking at. And we'll learn from Mersey and we'll learn from Cambridge and Peterborough. But there isn't an active market in it, because it's very, if you think there's only 1 or 2 a year possibly, there's not a lot of business in this.
And I'm looking at it therefore for the potential to slow down all the rest of the process.
We got any other questions on this? Have you got
no
some
further
more?
points from a presentation point of view, but if any other questions, happy to answer.
One question, with you working with, you're talking about with other authorities and getting their knowledge, how does that in terms of, because there are potential where when we're looking at with the bus companies, there's a potential taking over their depots or setting up alternative depots. How does that ride with commercial confidentiality when you're working with other individual authorities? Because there's a potential that a bus company, I presume, can come back and say, well, actually, you've colluded with them to
Yeah, no, it's not that. So we're trying to learn from a process point of view.
Okay.
Our business case is our business case based on our local market, the services, the profitability of the operators.
Okay.
But it's about process and learning from experience.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? No.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, Tim. I mean, I'm just saying. I mean, I'm just aware where it fits into the process of forward decisions. Just checking what it isn't already on the forward plan for I mean, there has to be a formal decision somewhere after the assessment's been done and a decision to submit it to audit. So if that could be happening in the autumn, I'm sure that needs to be on the Mayor's work plan at some point, and therefore we ought to fit into.
We're not at a stage yet to know which MCA it will go to, because that work is iterative and complicated and ongoing. So, obviously, we need to give 28 days, note on the forward plan.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we're not in a position to know which committee it will go to.
But surely we can. That's the point that I think Douglas is trying to make as well, is that we need to the strategic case that we need to know, because that will be substantially complete at some time sooner than the rest, because otherwise there's no point in proceeding with the rest. No.
I wonder on the strategic case, it's worth one of the informal sessions you're talking about, having a presentation on what, because the strategic case is probably quite generic in many ways in terms of it's about policies and procedures, policies in particular of, is that something you want an informal presentation about?
Would the committee be happy with that in terms of there's that as a first step, because it's better to have a look.
And the team that are working on franchise can probably bring that forward to you.
Well, I think that'd be useful, because then we can actually have frank discussion about the contents of it, without it being public, and we do need to know that for all the political groups and all the authorities here, frankly. Okay, thanks, Tim.
Thank you for that.
Tim.
I think we've moved. Shall we move on to the tram concession introduction?
You've got me again, Chair.
And it's you, yeah. Tim.
Again, so I'll try and be relatively brief on this, but happy to take questions as I run through. So just a bit of background for members. Current system, as I'm sure you're well aware, is almost 30 years old, implemented in the late 1990s. And is made up of a number of assets that are, in general, approaching the end of their economic life, but also associated with that is the concession agreement which was let to Super Tram Stagecoach Group back in 1997. That comes to an end on the 21st of March next year. Next slide, please. So, in order for us to treat and deal with that concession end, the MCA took the decision earlier this year to establish a wholly owned subsidiary of the Combined Authority and to transition day-to-day operations from Stagecoach Super Tram Limited into that subsidiary organisation, and to continue to operate the day-to-day operations of that tram system through that new organisation. To give you a sense of scale, and again I won't go through this in specific detail, this involves around 350 employees, 32 trams overall that need to be operated, somewhere in the order of about £14.5 million of farebox revenue taken each year as well. So a significant ongoing concern organisation that will be transitioned to the MCA at the end of March of next year. So in order to do that, we've established a combined authority implementation team, a transition and mobilisation team that's both fully resourced now, but also with increasing levels of resource in the coming months. And really, its primary motivation is to understand current operations, understand in detail how Supertram operate now, understand their practices, their procedures, undertake all that due diligence work that you'd absolutely expect to take place, and then prepare the plans and foundations by which that transfer of operations will take place in March. But very much to ensure that that day one of operations on the 22nd of March next year is both seamless, transparent, but safe from a customer's point of view. So really, success for us on day one is customers continuing to use the tram exactly as they do now. We don't want any level of disruption or transitionary change as a consequence of that activity. And only from then will we then start to build and improve the services that we will inherit at that point. Next slide, and again. So again, what I'll not do is to go through these individual slides content in detail, but in terms of the mobilisation work, there are a number of work streams that have been established, and again, details of each of those you can see on the slides before you. I'll quickly skim through them. Obviously, there's a significant amount of work that Steve Davenport is involved in terms of the legal establishment of the new organisation, but also setting up agreements between both Stagecoach, Supertram and us now in terms of the transition agreement arrangements, but also then what that future contract looks like between the combined authority and NewCo, and how it's governed, what its board structure looks like, and so on and so forth. There's a whole heap of IT infrastructure and back office systems that need to be implemented. As you might expect, with Stagecoach Group owning and managing the current operations, there are a number of things there that they will want to retain for themselves. So we're wanting to establish our own operational IT systems, just your core infrastructure that runs any IT system and platform, as you might expect now, but also some kind of bespoke and prescriptive IT systems. So things like scheduling, things like asset management systems, payroll systems, HR systems more generally, all of those will need to be established, and established well ahead of that 22nd of March date to make sure that we've tested them, implemented them, and people know how to use them. We need to set up retailing systems. So again, all of the current retailing systems are hardwired into Stagecoach operations, so we'll need our own ability to sell and collect revenue. And again, we are already well on with purchasing the hardware and the infrastructure required to be able to sell tickets using the handheld devices that are on board at the moment, or equivalent thereof, but also all the back office systems. So how you collect revenue, how revenue is gathered through online retail and remote ticketing systems more generally. Huge amount of TUPE, as you might expect, so the people and HR activity as well. We've got, say, 350 employees being TUPE'd into the new organisation, and there's also an awful lot of communication and engagement activity already underway. So we're doing drop-in sessions and engagement sessions with that workforce, making sure that they're satisfied with the arrangements that are being prepared for them in terms of giving them some comfort. Clearly, union engagement is also really important as well as part of that process too. Day-to-day operations, so just understanding how they run the system, and again, we don't want to impart any levels of risk in the transition. So, to some extent, if we're satisfied that it operates as it does now, then we're not going to be looking to make changes, certainly not on day one, but I'll come on to some further plans in a moment. And last but absolutely not least, from a safety point of view, we have to make sure, given public ownership of this system from March, that the future operations and continued operations are safe. So they meet the minimum expectations of ORR, all rail regulations, all health and safety regulations are met, and we can then continue to build on those in terms of our minimum expectations from a safety management system perspective. Next slide, please. So again, this just hopefully gives you a bit of a sense against where we're at on those work streams. Again, I'll not go into each of these in turn, but just to give you a bit of a sense of some of the main themes to pull out. That safety point that I made a moment ago, we have already developed our SMS, so our safety management system for this. We've shared that in draft with the ORR. We will submit our safety management system for their approval next month, get approval of that planned into the new year, and that will give us license to operate in essence well ahead of that transitionary date as it stands now. We have made significant progress, particularly with drawing up contractual arrangements, particularly with Stagecoach as they stand now. So we have to have a transition agreement that is now in place. That has unlocked our ability to access and have a formal agreement in place with Stagecoach Group in terms of how their management interact with us over the next 6 months. And actually, it is in essence 6 months to the day from today that this will all become real. So that's a significant piece of work that Steve has been leading on, and the project team more generally. And then obviously we'll then move into the more detailed work around further legal requirements, but also further things like procurement and contractual arrangements with the supply chain that exist going forward. Probably worth just picking out, the only other thing I would pick out from this particular slide is around resourcing. So again, we know what resources they've got. We've completed our due diligence. we'll be moving very much into that implementation phase next month. We are looking at service optimisation options, but again, none of those will be implemented until well after day one of operations, and we start to understand what kind of, you know, a more efficient, potentially, use of the existing resources may look like. All of this is underpinned by, if you could just go to the next slide for me, please, is what is being described as a 100-day plan. So the project team at the moment are working on both a plan to deliver day one seamless transition, as we described a moment ago, but also in parallel to have ready for the new management team, or the management team that will be operating this within the new co, 100-day plan. And that's about building on the basics of that day one go live, starting to look at some of those system improvements, some of those process improvements, some efficiencies that we believe can still be achieved through what they currently do. And that's by no way as a criticism of current operations, but inevitably they've been doing this for 20 or more years, and they've got some systems which are quite old and have not been replaced, and some of those processes will inevitably need to be refreshed. So we want to use this as an opportunity to do that, and all of those things will be captured in that 100-day plan. In parallel to that 100-day plan, there is also a business plan process, and again, the business plan needs to be owned by NewCo but supported and approved by the combined authority. A 5-year business plan, albeit focused on the first 2 years, is currently in development. I'm hoping to see a new draft of that in coming weeks, and that business plan will then describe how that company will effectively operate for future years, because what we want it to do is to, wherever possible, return to profit-making operations and get us to a place where patronage increases as well, from a combination of increased patronage and reduced costs as well. So all of those things are in train. As I say, there is a next step in terms of major activity in October when we move into that transition phase, and more resources will be added to the project team at that point in time as well. Just jump to the next slide. Again, I'll not touch on this. It just gives you a sense, hopefully, of the amount of resources that are already allocated in that mobilisation team as we stand. And again, some of these are currently only part-time. They'll be moving to full-time roles in the next month. What's not fully shown on here is the existing operations team, so the team that in essence report into me, that sit alongside this and will also be working to support the transition team in developing the safety management system and the retail systems and so on and so forth. So I'll pause there, Chair. I think that is the end of the presentation. Hopefully that gave you an abridged version at least of where we're at in the process, but happy to take questions. Douglas?
Yeah, thanks. Useful presentation. I was just wondering if you can just tell us how, if you're getting the right level of cooperation from Stagecoach Supertram, who manage it at the moment.
I think it's fair to say that this again, no criticism, but understandably there were some concerns given the level of uncertainty as to what this process might look like in the early days of the conversations. But the mobilisation and implementation team spent a lot of time, as I said, talking to the workforce, both to senior management but to shop floors, drivers, conductors, about what the process will mean to them, and giving them a level of assurance in terms of how the process will happen, and we are listening to them as part of that process too. The transition agreement that I mentioned a moment ago as well has been a key tool, and is now a key tool, to ensure a level of access, particularly to senior managers within Stagecoach Supertram, to allow us to ensure that they can spend time talking to us about our plans. They understand what our plans are aiming to achieve, and that I don't know exactly when that was signed. It's in the last couple of weeks, I think, Steve, from memory. Yesterday. Right. Well, good. There you go. So that now will give us real firm access to that part of the organisation. Not that they were being obstructive, far from it. They were being very collaborative actually thus far, but it's formalised the needs of that arrangement.
Right. Okay. Well,
I mean, I think on that, I think there's that agreement now effectively allows both parties, Stagecoach Group and ourselves, because it actually having this smooth transition is as much in the interest of their employees and the travelling public as it is, so that they accept that, and now that agreement's in place, it will hopefully oil the wheels of their cooperation. And it's the staff over there who are going to tune into us, who need to collaborate with us, and therefore, again, it's in their interest, and so it's in all parties' interest to make this run really smoothly now.
I was going to say, first of all, congratulations on getting the contractual transition agreement into place, because that's important. Good to know that. The other question I've got is with cooperation is about with Network Rail, because I think we'll understand they're notoriously slow and do things at their own speed rather than the needs of the people in South Yorkshire. Where are we with Network Rail, given that we've got the element of the tram in?
So the primary requirement, as I understand it, and this isn't my area of whole expertise, but Steve may be able to add on what I'm able to say. The critical part is having both a track access agreement, which is necessary, but also demonstration of the ability to be able to safely operate on a tramway and on heavy rail, which comes as part of your safety management system. Those are the two things which we are actively working on to try and actually get the Office of Rail and Road sign off on well ahead of, what you don't want to be doing is waiting until the 11th hour that your operating licence is being granted. We want to do that, early in the new year, in essence, for them to be able to say, we trust you as a new operator. It's the same staff doing the same things. You have a new SMS because you have to do that anyway, but that then gives you the ability to then have the licence to go and operate, and that will be granted to the new co, not to obviously Sizewell, who will no longer exist after that date. I don't know, Steve, if you want to add any more to that.
Yeah, when there isn't a lot of interaction with Network Rail required, because when the track access agreement to allow the tram train to operate on the heavy rail out to Rotherham was negotiated, it included a right to novate the track access agreement to the new operator. So we were looking ahead at that point, so that was dealt with at that point. So there is some legal mechanism to sort it out, and then it is with the ORR about an operational licence to prove that Newco is a fit and proper person. You've got to have the right insurances in place, and so I think it's fair to say the project team is now resourced and has a very detailed, almost day-by-day plan of action now to achieve the timescale.
Right, no, good. That's good to know. My final question is really just about the finances. And see, as everyone knows, Stagecoach Supertrams have been absorbing a loss year on year. Where is that going to leave Simca's finances?
So the MCA has already approved and endorsed a level of revenue subsidy for Sizewell, year one to the tune of 7 million, and that then declines through to the end of this decade to 6 and then 5 million in terms of operating subsidy. I can't remember exactly which year it transitions from 6 to 5, but I'm sure we can provide that if interested. But it's in our stated accounts, it's in our public accounts, so that's clearly already approved and endorsed, and an awful lot of work was done by finance colleagues and directors of finance across the 4 local authorities to get to that point. As you might expect, it was potentially quite a contentious requirement. What we do need to be absolutely mindful of is the things we can do to grow patronage, therefore to grow revenue, but also mindful of the asset renewal works which are due in the latter half of this decade, which inevitably have an impact on demand because you close part of the system, people don't use it. So we have to make sure that those works are done and planned in such a way that we minimise the impact on the passenger, particularly the re-railing work, because that is the most disruptive work of all. And make sure that we monitor the implications of those asset renewal works, which are necessary. We have to do them. We have no alternative, and see what that does then in terms of impact on revenue. But we have changed the way we do our re-railing work to be much more focused and condensed into a shorter period of time to try and minimise the impact on passengers. So this summer's work, for example, only lasted 2 weeks, and in previous years we've done 4, 6, 7 weeks worth of work in a continuous chunk. So we're trying to phase the work differently from here on in to minimise that impact.
Good.
What's the stop Stagecoach put on a bus route on exactly the same line as the tram at a much cheaper fare for a certain amount of time, which will blow our revenue
like the 120
budget?
you mean, which already covers a significant portion of that route. They do it. They have there's nothing we can stop them doing it. Deregulated market, it is entirely their choice. Now, clearly under a franchise market, that would be entirely within our control. But at the moment, there isn't actually a huge amount of competition, and the reason why there isn't a huge amount of competition is because the tram serves a different purpose. On particularly parts of the network, that halfway into Sheffield, there's quite a lot of segregated track as well, so the tram will get you there quicker depending on where your destination is as well. So there is competition, but not to the same extent actually that you might think. But granted, there isn't anything to stop an operator in practice from trying to compete directly with the tram.
But was there a consideration with the franchising what you're doing on the buses to look at the trams being at the same time so that you wouldn't be faced with this potential variable, shall we say?
I'm sure that in due course, were we to take the decision on franchising, that would be looked at. I actually would probably look at it as more of an opportunity to integrate better connections between bus and tram. So you may recall the SL1 service. I'm sure Councillor Hitchin will recall the Super Tram link and its loss. You know, those are the kinds of opportunities that exist under a franchise network to properly connect into the nodes of the system to allow people to make onboard journeys more effectively.
I think also to answer the question, the tram date is driven by the end of stagecoach concessions. So they have no right to operate it beyond that date.
I know, but was there any consideration given to giving them an extension whilst the franchising was sorted out? I mean,
yes, there was a consideration to give them an extension, but equally legally you're not allowed to because it would be a new procurement. Their contract ends, and it would be a public procurement, so we'd have to go out to the market to procure a new operator. We had two options: go out to the market, procure a new operator, or bring it in-house for operations. And for reasons that link to what Tim said around all the work we need to do on the infrastructure, it was decided it was better to bring the operations in-house. One of the reasons, so we can coordinate the capital works with the operations to best mitigate the impacts. If you had a private operator, you'd be into a change process every time you wanted to close part of the route to do some capital works. You'd be into compensation for their revenue loss. It becomes very contractually very complicated. This way we control the impacts on the capital cost or the revenue, depending how you phase and implement the works to meet our sort of sweet spot, if you like, of what we want to achieve.
My only concern is that the 7 million you've talked about is that 7 million that could get eaten up really quickly if there's some shenanigans going on from any of the bus companies.
Yeah, I mean, just to, again, to put that in context, we did market consultation with the tram operating market before we determined to come in-house, and basically none of those would take the revenue risk on, so we would retain that revenue risk in any event. So we couldn't mitigate it by getting the private sector to come and operate, because they wouldn't take it. They just wanted paying to operate the system, a guaranteed amount of money regardless of revenue, because clearly they didn't know how much work we were going to do would impact their system. So these things were looked at, and there is a report to the MCA if you want to.
That's all on that particular presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that. I think that there's nothing else to discuss, and we'll close the meeting at 3:43. I'm just adding on because the clock's wrong on the